This final episode of the History of Witchers will be filled with speculations on my part based on what we know of the world of The Witcher. Of course, there's no real other way to talk about the future than through theories, but just keep that in mind. And do tell me about your own theories as well if you have any. I actually love to read other people's thoughts on basically anything Witcher related. The future of Witchers is an uncertain one at best. The schools have lost their mages and most of their members, monsters are a dying breed, and with it, Witchers are simply no longer necessary. Especially now that the regular army becomes more adept at dealing with monsters as well. Just how few Witchers are left in the world becomes heartbreakingly obvious when you realize that, before meeting Geralt, neither Yennefer nor Ciri had ever met a Witcher. They'd only heard stories of the legendary monster hunters, and Yennefer was very interested in learning more of Geralt. Yennefer, being a well-respected sorceress who travelled around quite a bit and no doubt was asked about curses too, on occasion, should by all accounts have met a Witcher at some point in her long life, but she didn't. We know that, before the attack on Kaer Morhen, 23 fully trained Witchers and 40 apprentices were present in the Wolf Keep. A total of 63 people. That doesn't seem like a lot in the first place, does it? We can imagine that the other Witcher schools would hold roughly the same amount, perhaps a bit less. So what are we left with that we know of? We only have 3 Wolf Witchers left now that Vesemir has died: Geralt, Lambert, and Eskel. If you allowed Letho to live, there's him and the 2 Viper Witchers he mentioned, although of course we're not certain they're still alive. There's Yad Karadin of the School of the Cat, again if you let him live, although we can be relatively certain Lambert goes back to kill him if you do decide to spare him. And honestly, everyone else is speculation on whether they're still alive as well after we've met them. Brian of the Cat and Berengar of the Wolf, they didn't seem too happy about the Witcher life, so they might have just quit. Gaetan of the Cat, who behaved like a loose cannon, butchering an entire village in a fit of rage. Schrödinger of the Cat is a definite maybe. Olivier of Gullet is only mentioned in a book on Garcanes from long ago. He might have already died at the time of writing. Merton is now an ex-Witcher and went adventuring as a disciple of Lebioda, and Ivar Evil Eye of the Viper is no doubt still waiting for that letter he never got. So all in all, if we're being as generous as can be and just assume that everyone survived, we know of a total of 12 active Witchers. That is basically extinct. What does that mean for the world they're at present still a part of? Trouble, actually, a book detailing the conjunction of spheres, states the following. Could the worlds collide once more? Perhaps. Can this cataclysm be avoided? Or the opposite, hastened? Some scholars believe there are beings who have mastered this skill, who possess rare genes which allow them to seize the helm of our vessel and steer us to safer waters or to our doom. Now, I won't go into the conjunction of spheres too much, as that warrants a video on its own. But for now, if you don't know what the conjunction is, it's what caused monsters to appear in the world of The Witcher, and according to the elves, it also brought humans to their world. The writer of the book clearly believes that a conjunction can happen again. In fact, in an earlier paragraph, he uses the time frame once every 1,000 years. According to the novels of The Witcher, the conjunction occurred 1,500 years ago. So, another collision would theoretically happen in 500 years. But the more interesting part of the text is, of course, can this cataclysm be avoided, or the opposite, hastened? What if it can? We know for a fact that there are certain mages in the world that would do anything in the name of science, either to learn more or to gain renown. If we can surmise from this book that there is a possibility, surely they can too, if only for the opportunity to study more interesting monsters or worlds. And if mages aren't in fact capable, what about elves? At this point, driven close to extinction themselves, they're getting more and more desperate. Elven magic is in fact different in several ways from humans. So if the humans can't do it, elves might. We know that at least Avalach, the Enel and Severn, is capable of opening a rift between worlds. Not to mention Ciri, as it's very likely that the gene the author mentions is in fact the Elder Blood. And there is at least one Ensavern we know for a fact is still alive, as we have a short chat with her through Yennefer's megascope, Ida Emion Epsivni. If driven to the edge, perhaps she would attempt it. So barring the rabbit hole that are Ciri's powers, those are two options to create another conjunction of spheres. And what happens then? We get more monsters, of course. Or perhaps even worse, humanity is thrown into yet another world altogether. What then? While the army might certainly be capable enough to deal with the garden variety of monsters, ghouls and drowners, they simply aren't equipped to handle curses or higher vampires, not by a long shot. Imagine that humanity is in fact thrown into the realm of the vampires. I'm sure at least Regis would be happy. Witchers have books detailing all the monsters in the world, or at least as far as they know. Even these books don't have all the monsters recorded. In Toussaint, Geralt comes across a monster that reminded him of a candelabra, which later changed to look more like a crooked little tree with two large phosphorescent eyes. It changed shape again later to have impossibly long legs. Imagine a soldier having to face creatures such as that, with no background knowledge of even the most basic of monsters, other than they want to eat you. And that's not even considering the amount of deaths you will still have fighting monsters at all. Witchers, as we know, are highly trained, mutated killing machines. They take witcher potions to enhance their abilities even further. They're immune to most poisons and diseases. In fact, they're so incredibly don't care, they drink white gull like alcohol constantly. And even still, they are at times defeated by the more threatening monsters. What chance do soldiers have? So, while the people in the Witcher world might often talk about not needing Witchers anymore, and even Witchers talk that way, I don't believe they're right. Keep in mind as well that most of the technological advances have been made by either elves or mages, not even mentioning the clever gnomes. And what group of people is more hunted than they? They're burned at the stake by the bundles every day. Soon there will be none left, or those left will at least be in hiding, unwilling to aid anyone but themselves, simply trying to survive. So keeping that in mind, progression will slow to a sudden crawl. If we look at the Witcher 3 game, and specifically we look at all the things Geralt does in that game, imagine if the world had to deal with all of that without Witchers. Even putting aside the fact Beauclair was essentially burned to the ground and then some by vampires, or the fact that a literal Satan walked among men, stealing their souls, or the seemingly endless amount of cursed graveyards, ruins, and miscellaneous items. They would have the Wild Hunt to contend with, because don't forget, yes, they were after Ciri initially, but their goal was in fact to take over the world, to use her powers to hop worlds at will. So yes, world domination like a proper villain plot, to avoid being killed by the White Frost straight away. They simply wanted to kill everyone in the Witcher realm to make room for the NL. We know for a fact that they've done this before, from the current world of the NL, where Ciri finds a mountain of skulls from the previous inhabitants. The only reason this didn't happen to the Witcher world is because a very small group of Witchers banded together to make sure it didn't happen. And even then they needed help from, you guessed it, mages, which are also going extinct. So I think at this point we have a reasonable case for wanting Witchers around for a little bit longer. But can they be? No new Witchers have been created for a very long time, not since the attacks on the Witchers. However, as we learn during the decursing of Uma, Yennefer has in fact discovered the secrets to the trial of the grasses. The mutagens they already knew how to use, even more so now that they have the added research from Dr. Moreau and the muted generator from Regis. When they discuss using the trial on Uma, and Yennefer notes that she'd be the last to suggest they start producing hordes of Witchers with her newfound knowledge, Eskel even says it outright. "You hardly need to," he replies. "See, till now we had a great excuse not to take in apprentices. Seems we'll need to talk it over." So, not knowing how to make new Witchers is no longer an excuse. At least Eskel is considering it. And we know for a fact that Letho of Gullet is very interested in rebuilding the School of the Viper. So no doubt he'd gladly use Yennefer's knowledge as well. We know Yennefer does somewhat owe Letho for keeping her safe when she left the Wild Hunt. And speaking of Letho, during the end of the second game he mentions, "The Witcher schools in the south have fallen into ruin long ago." Does that mean there are yet other Witcher schools we don't know about? Aside from Hackland and Zerrikania, we've also never actually seen Nilfgaard ourselves. We know of the Viper, of course, but Nilfgaard is a big place. Nazaire, Matina, Ebbing, that's a lot of ground to cover for just one Witcher school. But like I said, we've never heard of any other Nilfgaardian Witcher schools yet. If we assume that the bear is indeed from Skellige and the manticore from Zerrikania, why haven't we met them? Are they simply better at hiding? The School of the Viper is secretive enough. Nilfgaard is well known for their many spies and secret organizations, why not their Witchers too? And if they are indeed so hidden that no one has ever met any of them that they know of, perhaps they're still in one piece, mostly. Even if it's only one other school Letho is referring to beside the Viper, there could still be an opportunity to help train new Witchers or indeed provide refuge, wherever it is they're hiding. Although if they've kept hidden all these years after the attack on their school, they would have to have good reason to come out of hiding now. The School of the Bat, perhaps, where vampires go to become Witchers? School of the Woodland Fox, where everyone is renamed Jorveth upon entry? I'm joking, of course, but really it could be anything, and that's very exciting. Although there is, of course, also the slightly less positive approach, which is to say they were so utterly destroyed that nothing and no one is left of them. So there's an opportunity now to create more Witchers, but our final question is, do they want to? We know for a fact that many Witchers loathe the Witcher path. Lambert, Gaetan, even Geralt at times. Right before the pogrom in Rivia, Geralt tells Yarp and Zigrin that he wanted to retire from being a Witcher. The job no longer held interest to him. He was tired of risking his neck for others, and he even gave away his sword, which was originally Zoltan's, then and there. And even then, Yarpen disagrees with Geralt when he says Witchers simply won't be needed anymore. Yarpen says, "Each time there will be more light, and we will be less afraid of the dark and the evil that lurks in it. Perhaps the day will come when we will simply stop believing that something is hidden in the darkness, and we will laugh at that kind of fear. It will seem childish, and it will bring shame, but there will always be darkness. And evil will always be waiting in the darkness with its claws, fangs, and blood. And Witchers will always be necessary." Rather profound coming from a dwarf, especially as they'd already been drinking at that point, but from this conversation we gather that Geralt doesn't exactly feel appreciated either. Witchers are spit on by society. They're called freaks and mutants. The common folk will take their help, but as soon as their troubles are gone, they can't see the Witcher that aided them leave fast enough. A Witcher called Cohen, that actually wintered at Kaer Morhen with Geralt and his buddies at one point, actually signed up as a volunteer to fight against Nilfgaard at the Battle of Brenna. He died during that battle, ironically stabbed by a two-pronged pitchfork, as predicted by Ciri. Witchers at this point should just run at the sight of any pitchforks. Even so, after the battle is won, a certain hierarch Hemelfart thought to himself that they should make sure not to note any of the non-humans, Witchers or thugs that helped win this war, when it was written down in the history books. So you see, regular humans in the Witcher world all too often turn out to be scumbags. And Witchers have had quite enough of that, as it seems. Can you really blame them? They continuously risk their lives for a few coins, to save the lives of others. Others that show them nothing but disdain. Geralt had even made up his own Witcher code, as most Witchers did, because truth be told, no one's ever written down a proper one. Every time Geralt says his code forbids it, all it means is that he personally doesn't feel it's right, or he personally doesn't want to get involved, or he personally doesn't give enough of a crap to do it. The common folk, or in fact anyone save Witchers, know so little of the monster slayers, they'll believe anything he says. Witchers might as well be ghouls themselves with the way they're looked upon. But we know this wasn't always the case, at least in some parts of the Northern Realms. When Geralt is hard at work to find Salamandra, he comes across some notes directing him to find Raven's armor. Raven was a legendary Witcher. He was buried in his own tomb with the inscription, Here lies the Witcher known as Raven, a great warrior and defender of the weak, honored be his name. Now we know Witchers don't generally build tombs for their dead, they burn them. So who built this tomb? Since Raven was alive a very long time ago, and his armor was in fact finished by the elven smith Chensail, who took a particular interest in his armor, it could have also been the elves. From our previous encounters we do know that, although elves aren't exactly overjoyed to meet a Witcher, they also don't seem to mind them at all. Yavin and Jorveth at least seem to tolerate Geralt rather well. Even if you side against Yavin and he accuses Geralt of causing Teruviel's death, he still doesn't mindlessly attack you outright. You can even walk away without a fight. So it's rather likely it was in fact an elf or several elves that built the tomb for Raven. After all, we know Geralt considers himself more non-human than human as well most times. So it isn't exactly a stretch that Raven defended the elves from angry humans as well, just like Geralt had in Rivia. Human hating aside, there is, however, one group of humans that treat Witchers like any other person. Skelligers. They don't care who or what you are, they only care to see how strong your axe arm is, and Geralt is a good friend of Crag, and Skelligers don't seem to spit on him or call him mutant and freak as often either. We know from the stories of the Bear School Witchers that they too always find good company in Skellige. So, in conclusion, I suppose about the future of the Witcher we could say the following. Rebuilding a new Witcher order would be best done on the Skellige Isles, with non-human neighbours and Yennefer leading the trial of the grasses. Make sure to send a few adventuring Witchers out to find any stray Witchers, and hide all the pitchforks. If a new conjunction of spheres is on the horizon, at least we'll be ready for it. Va fail!